What's the matter with you? What's the matter with you?
Released originally in 1998 for Windows PC, Mac OS, and later released for the PlayStation in 1999. It's the X-Files on PlayStation 1 being played on my PlayStation 3, a full-motion video adventure game otherwise known as an FMV video game. Developed by Hyperbole Studios and published by Fox Interactive for North America on PC, and by Electronic Arts for European regions, and by Sony Computer Entertainment for the PlayStation worldwide, this review will be purely based on the PlayStation version of the game. In the X-Files video game, you don't play as Mulder or Scully.
Agent Wilmore, FBI. Like to ask you a few questions.
Instead, you play as Agent Wilmore, an agent with the FBI based out of Seattle, where primarily the game takes place and was filmed. Taking place within the timeline of the third season of the show, you're approached by Assistant Director of the FBI, Walter Skinner, to investigate the disappearance of two agents, Fox Mulder and Dana Scully. Keeping things spoiler-free for those interested in playing, one thing leads to the next, and you're teamed up with the Seattle Police Department detective named Mary, forgive me if I pronounce this horribly wrong, Astadorian, I'm not sure. And it's up to you as Agent Craig Wilmore to find the missing agents and solve the overarching conspiracy behind their disappearances. But is the game itself any good? Let's find out first with the good. The best aspect of this game, using that word loosely here, is that it basically feels like a 3-hour episode of the X-Files. And if you're a fan of the X-Files, then you're in for a long, subpar episode of it. Without sounding too overly negative already, the game offers an interesting concept of basically being an FBI agent set within the X-Files universe itself. You'll get to explore different environments, gather clues and evidence, and of course you'll get to interact with the cast of the series.
A black man.
What black man?
Which is honestly the only redeeming factor of this game. The game features the cast and the two stars of the show, Mulder and Scully, to the lone gunmen,
Some of us are more than just friends.
She asked us to contact her.
and Skinner for a whole 5 minutes.
I don't want that.
But even the star power of this cast can't save the game from the bad.
Sir, I'm Agent Dana Scully with the FBI.
There's a reason why these games hardly exist anymore. FMV games in general have an awful reputation for poor production values, very little to almost no form of gameplay, and being extremely short. And as I said, this is basically a 3-hour episode of the X-Files, but it's a pretty dull 3-hour episode. The acting, for example, ranges from decent to extremely stiff and forced. Take the main character of the game, for example, Agent Wilmore. Almost every bit of dialogue he delivers sounds extremely stiff and forced.
We're looking for information on 2 FBI agents who checked in here.
Mm-hmm. And their names would be?
Agents Mulder and Scully.
Oh, yeah. They paid for a week in advance, room 3 and 4.
Did you notice anything unusual about the 2 agents?
The guy was kind of spooky. Other than that, no.
You'd think with such a big property at the time as the X-Files, especially in the mid to late 90s, would get a decent budget from Fox for its video game, and would have some decent actors. I mean, this is the same show that had single-episode characters and performances by incredible actors such as Bryan Cranston, for example. Instead, for the video game, we get Jordan Lee Williams, who according to IMDb played the hit character in the previous episode of the X-Files known as Basketball Player. And in the show The Practice, he played everyone's favorite, Guy, before moving on and finally delivering his finest performance in the X-Files video game. And to be fair, even the main cast of the show deliver an almost just bored, stiff performance most of the time.
I think he's looking for what's being stored in this facility.
Oh, really? Uh-huh. And what would that be?
Worse yet, you rarely ever even see them. Out of the 4 discs on the PlayStation 1 version of the game, you don't even get to meet Mulder or Scully until the final and 4th disc of the game. From what I've read online, the main cast was too busy filming the upcoming movie at the time. So the developers had to basically make do with different characters and set up a story of why Mulder and Scully were missing to explain why they're hardly in the video game, based off the TV show they star in. I noticed during my roughly 4 or so hours with it, the audio or video would abruptly end or did cut mid-sentence or dialogue.
Give me a minute. I want you to know you're putting me behind.
Sorry, don't mean to bother you at work.
Fine.
Don't mean to bother you at work.
Fine.
Don't mean to bother you at work.
I don't know if this happens on the PC version or if it's exclusive to the PlayStation version, or possibly the PlayStation 3's PS1 emulation goofing up, or because of the game being read off CDs, or just really shoddy editing from the developers, or a mixture of all of the above.
Hey, wait. What happened to you? Where's Mo?
And speaking of the PC version, from what I can tell online, it's easily the better version of the game, with higher quality video and audio. However, instead of 4 discs like on the PlayStation version, you now get 7 discs. Meanwhile, on the PlayStation 1 version, you get an awful, horribly compressed version of the game with everything looking low res and extremely pixelated. It's hard to tell with Sony Vegas upscaling the footage for this review, but trust me, playing this through my PlayStation 3, it looks fairly bad. Just imagine playing a game with a pre-recorded cutscene that looks all blocky and pixelated, but instead that's actually the entire video game. To top things off even more, the HUD and UI of the game were somewhat broken for me. Thankfully, everything is still labeled correctly though. From what I've read online, the only way to fix this issue is playing on an original PlayStation, or possibly using an emulator. Trying to play this on both the PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3 will still give you a broken HUD. Even worse yet, since the HUD in the game UI was broken for me, it made these shooting segments a living hell.
Cover me.
You got it.
The only way I could even beat these segments was by setting the difficulty to easy, which I think makes it auto-target for you. I couldn't really tell though, since it looked broken anyways, and I just ended up mashing X and hoping for the best. The game also has the odd moment where it throws a random timed segment at you, where if you don't answer a question quick enough or give them a specific item quick enough, you'll fail.
I have very little patience and even less time. Do I have your word?
Not to mention, some of these will then kick you back to the main menu instead of giving you the option to try again, so you'll then have to reload your game, and if you're like me and forgot to save, you'll lose a ton of progress.
That's ridiculous. You better explain yourself or I'm calling for help. Who sent you here? Don't move.
I really can't believe I'm having to do this. After 5 years at the Bureau, you should know better. I need your badge and gun.
I had to go all the way back, take out Disc 4, put in Disc 3, and reload my game again from the start of Disc 3, and catch up on like an hour of exciting, air quotes here, gameplay. Which in my opinion brings up the worst part of this game. When you aren't watching FMV cutscenes or asking questions, you're playing this game. Which to sum up is navigating dark pixelated pictures and trying to find clues and evidence. This basically sums up the other half of this entire game. But with that all said and done, now it's time I give the opinion. I can honestly only recommend this game if you're a fan of the Xbox, and even then I'd suggest going and watching it on YouTube instead.
Hold on. I was assigned to find you and Scully. I've done that. I'm out of here.
What kind of attitude is that? The game's not over yet.
But if you're an absolute die-hard fan of the series and need this game in your collection, thankfully it's pretty easy to find online and relatively cheap. I'd suggest just not dropping a lot of money on this and avoiding the PlayStation version if possible. Thankfully this was a gift though from my co-host Sam, so shouts out. The game overall does have some redeeming aspects if you're looking for a so bad it's good type experience. But with that said, now it's time for the rating. I give this the hit movie starring David Duchovny, Evolution, out of 10.